A broken piece of clay, it's a seal. A seal from a city that's been gone for thousands of years, and it was shattered. But this fragment, this broken piece, it was a key. It was the key to a whole system of control, a system for managing truth and authority. In a world that didn't have paper, it didn't have computers. We're in a world now where we're drowning in information, constantly asking what's real, who we can trust. And there was a solution to that problem 4,000 years ago. And that solution, that 4,000-year-old idea, it still shapes our world. Our digital world, this broken seal. It wasn't a flaw, it was a feature, and ancient bureaucrats, they built with it. They invented the first networks, secure networks, and we're still in that struggle, the endless struggle to verify the truth. And that struggle, it reveals something. It reveals something about us. The brush moves with a gentle patience. It's practiced. You're not clearing dust from a treasure chest. You're clearing it from a small piece of a system. What comes out isn't a coin, it isn't a weapon. It's a stone cylinder about the size of a fingertip, carved with patterns, and it's broken. That might seem like a disappointment, a fragment, an incomplete thing. But in that quiet moment under the sun, this broken seal isn't an end, it's a beginning, it's a handshake. A direct, physical handshake across 4,000 years. This small stone cylinder was a unique identifier. It belonged to one person, a temple administrator or a merchant overseeing grain, a royal scribe recording laws. You'd roll it across wet clay. It left a continuous impression, a distinctive one. That impression was a signature, a mark of authority. It said, I was here, I approved this. This transaction is true, and the fact it's broken, that says something. Maybe it was damaged when the building collapsed. Maybe it was defaced when that authority fell. Or maybe it's just wear and tear. From being used day after day to certify the truth of things. This fragment is a primary source. It's not a story written later. It's the original tool of control, lying right there in the dirt. So holding it, you're not just holding a piece of stone. You're holding a key to a question. What kind of world needed this object so desperately? What vast, silent system of verification was this tiny broken seal meant to uphold? That stone cylinder was a technology. Specific, brilliant piece of technology. To see the world it shows us, you have to look at the object. What is a seal? It's not a stamp you press down, it's more like a rolling pin. A rolling pin covered in tiny, intricate carvings. You take this cylinder, and while the clay on a tablet is still soft or the lump sealing a jar is wet, you roll it across the surface. And you don't get a single mark, you get a band. A continuous, repeating band of imagery. A miniature frieze pressed into the clay. That band was a signature. It was a brand. It was legal authentication. The carvings on the cylinder, the gods and heroes, the animals and scenes, those were unique to the owner. A temple official had a seal with a scene of worship. A merchant might have one showing a ship being loaded. That imagery was their visual identity, like a corporate logo now, or more accurately, like a unique key in a digital system. Rolling that seal did something. It transformed a plain piece of clay, a simple record of grain ode, into a secured document. Once that impression was made and the clay hardened, the contents of that jar, the words on that tablet were official. They were. To break the seal was to break a promise, to violate an agreement, to tamper with authority. This wasn't decorative art. It was the fundamental operating system for trust in the ancient world. From Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, this technology of rolling a carved stone became the silent backbone of commerce and law and administrative control. It was how a complex society said, this is true, this is approved, this transaction happened. But that system of trust, that network of information, it had to be built somewhere. It needed a home, a central nervous system. Where did all these sealed documents, these certified truths, where did they finally come to rest? These seals weren't just for kings. They were for a new professional class. The first bureaucrats in the world. Picture the temple accountant. In a dim storeroom surrounded by clay tablets, his job was to count, to measure, to record every basket of barley that came in, every jug of oil that went out. The city's survival depended on this work, this meticulous, unglamorous work. And his main tool wasn't a pen, it was his personal cylinder seal. When a shipment arrived, he'd take a damp lump of clay, press it over the knot on a jar's lid, then roll his seal across it. That impression made a clay bulla, a hardened, tamper-proof lock. It was a physical hyperlink. It connected the jar's contents to a record, to an individual, to a whole system of accountability. It said this much grain, this quality, is under this specific official's authority. It created a trail. A primitive but effective data system, one that didn't rely on memory or goodwill. It relied on a physical object that couldn't be easily forged. This was information control in its most practical form, Because in those early city-states, controlling the record of resources was the same as controlling power. If you controlled the seal, you controlled the grain. If you controlled the grain, you controlled the people. So these small stone cylinders were more than fancy signatures. They were the fundamental operating code for civilization's first large-scale administrative machines. They turned chaos into ledgers and suspicion into a fragile but functional trust. But what were they recording? What specific messages were they so desperate to lock into clay? What truths were they protecting the carvings on these seals? They were a language, a silent one. They weren't decoration. They were symbols chosen carefully, a kind of visual rhetoric pressed right into the clay. You see a common scene, a figure, often a king, standing before a god, and the god is handing something over, a ring and a rod. These were the old symbols for measurement, for justice. This wasn't a random story, it was a statement, a direct one. So when an official rolled this image onto a tablet recording taxes, he was doing something profound. He was embedding that document with a divine mandate. He was saying, this tally of grain, this decree, it's not just my word. It's sanctioned by the cosmic order itself. The gods gave the king this authority to measure, to judge, and through the seal that authority flowed right into the clay. It turned a simple administrative act into a sacred duty. The seal became a monument, a tiny, portable monument to power. And for the person getting that sealed document, the message was clear. To question the contents wasn't just disputing a bureaucrat, it was challenging the framework. Divine framework that held their world together. This symbolic language, it was of early information control. It didn't just verify data, it legitimized it. It wrapped the whole mundane mechanics, storage, distribution, it wrapped it in the imagery of myth, the awe-inspiring kind. The seal made the state's paperwork feel like an extension of natural law, God-given law. But this system, this symbolic control, this architecture of authority backed by the divine, it had a physical heart. All these sealed tablets, these certified truths, they didn't just float around, they were collected, stored, referenced. They needed a central point, a place where the whole network of information came together. The question is, where was that place that break in the stone? It's not an accident, it's a message. The fracture is data, important data. You have to think about a seal's purpose. It exists to be broken. Its whole reason for being is to fail. But the way it fails, that tells you everything. A clean break, a single line right across the chord mark on a jar. That's a good break. That's the sound of a promise kept. Someone with the right, the authority, they broke that seal to get to the grain inside. The system worked. The verification held right up until it was supposed to be dissolved. The seal did its job perfectly by being destroyed. But then there's the other kind, a shatter, multiple pieces, crushing. That speaks of a different force. That's not the careful snap of authorized access. That's violence. That could be the chaos of a city falling, an archive burning, a storeroom looted. In that moment, the seal stops being a tool of control. It becomes a victim of the loss of control. Its broken state narrates the final seconds, the desperate seconds of the system it upheld. The fracture makes you see these objects not as artifacts in a case, but as participants, active participants in history. They were there. They felt the pressure. They recorded the moment of breach in their substance. A broken seal is a fossilized moment of decision. Was this opened in peace or taken by force? Was this trust honored or betrayed? The clay holds the answer, frozen in its fragmented form. And if one broken seal can tell a story that complex, what story emerges when you find not one, but thousands of them all together in one place? What kind of room was built to hold the weight of that much certified truth? The sealed jar was just the start. That idea, that need to verify, to control information, it left the storeroom. It got built into the city itself. Officials would take their seals and press them into soft clay. They put these lumps right on door jambs, on granary doors, on treasury doors, on tombs. It was a tamper-evident system from the ancient world. A door seal was a silent guard. It didn't just lock the door. It recorded an opening. If that clay was broken, you knew. Everyone would know the space had been entered. The authority that put it there would know. It was security you could see, baked right into the clay. But the deepest use wasn't on jars or doors. It was on the tablets, the cuneiform tablets. Those clay slabs with the wedge-shaped writing, they recorded everything. Royal decrees, merchant contracts, personal letters. When a scribe finished writing, he'd take a new piece of clay. He'd wrap it around the tablet, encasing it completely. Then, while that outer envelope was still soft, he'd roll his personal cylinder seal across it. The tablet was sealed inside its own shell. To read the message, you had to break that outer layer. You had to destroy the seal. Think about that system. A sealed tablet was a closed communication. Certified, it was a time capsule of intent. Breaking the seal to read it created an irreversible record. It was an admission: I opened this, I accessed this information. That created a chain of custody you could verify. A king sends a sealed order to a governor, it arrives. The governor breaks the seal, reads it, and acts. The broken clay is proof. Proof the message was received. Proof it was opened by the right person. If the seal was intact, the message was still secret. If it was broken by someone else, the tampering was clear. This wasn't just privacy, it was accountability, making sure authority moved through the proper channels, that every link in that chain could be seen, identified. This ancient practice set down a principle we still deal with now: non-repudiation. In our digital world, that means creating a record of an action that can't be later, a digital signature on an email, a login timestamp, a blockchain transaction. These are all modern versions of that broken clay envelope. They answer the same old problem. How do you prove who did what and when? How do you create trust in a system where people can't see each other? 4,000 years ago, the answer was to bake the proof into the message itself. You had to break something to see the truth, and that breakage was the proof. The system accepted destruction as the cost of verification. But that leads to another question. If all these certified, sealed truths, the tablets, the jar seals, the door seals, if they were all part of one big system of control, where did it all end? What was the final destination for all this information? That broken seal wasn't just a tool, it was a person. In a world without photographs, without signatures, this carved cylinder was the ultimate proof of self, a legal identity pressed into clay. The connection was so profound, these seals were personal treasures for a lifetime. And beyond, archaeologists find them in graves placed carefully with their owners, a final statement, an administrator, a merchant, a priest. The seal went with them, a companion into the next world, or it was passed down father to son, an inheritance of authority and reputation. To possess the seal was to wield the identity, and that created an immense vulnerability. Losing your seal was a disaster. A personal, professional, legal catastrophe. Imagine if your face, your signature, your social security number, and the key to your bank account were all carved into one small stone you carried around, and then you dropped it. Anyone who found it could become you. In the eyes of the system, they could authorize shipments in your name, empty your storerooms, forge contracts. The entire architecture of trust built on these unique objects hinged on one fragile fact. You had to keep physical control of your identity. This vulnerability forced adaptation. Records were kept of sealed designs, witnesses were used, but the core problem remained. The trust was in the artifact, not the individual. The seal was the person. This deep physical link between identity and object runs straight through to our time. We don't carry carved stones, but we carry cards with magnetic strips, devices with biometric scanners, phones that generate passwords. Losing your phone or your wallet today triggers that same ancient panic, a modern version of that catastrophic loss. Someone could access your accounts, impersonate you. The principle is identical. Our digital identities are still built on the concept of a unique key, a private key, a piece of data meant to be known only to you. It's a seal carved not in stone but in code. So when we look at that broken cylinder, we're seeing the birth of a profound idea. That a person's legal and economic self can be represented by a unique physical object. That a society can agree to trust that object as a proxy for the individual. It was a brilliant, risky solution, one that made complex society possible, but it also created a new kind of ghost. What happens when the person is gone, but the seal, the identity, lives on? Who does the system then obey? A single seal was powerful, but it was also a single point of failure. The system had to correct for that. One person's word, one person's authority, it wasn't always enough. So they built a network of verification. They invented the witness. On the most critical tablets, the ones recording a land sale, a marriage contract, a treaty between cities, you don't find just one seal impression. You find several. Rolling across the clay, one after another, are the distinct bands from multiple cylinder seals. The primary parties would roll their seals. Then often a third person, a respected elder, a temple priest, a city official with no direct stake. They would add their seal too. This was the counterseal, the witness seal. It transformed the document. It was no longer a simple statement between two people. It was now a social fact, a truth by the community. Think of that clay tablet, it's a crowded space. A tapestry of tiny carved stories pressed side by side. Each seal is a voice, a physical voice saying, I saw this, I attest to this. I add my reputation, my own divine authority to the truth written here. The contract isn't just between two people anymore. It's between them and everyone who sees their seals. It's embedded in the social fabric. To break such an agreement wasn't just betraying one person. It was betraying the web of witnesses. It was challenging the collective memory, now baked permanently into the clay. This practice of multiple seals gave birth to ideas we still use. It was early. The witness seal was the ancient equivalent of a notary's stamp and signature, an impartial third party certifying identities and voluntary agreement. It was also the birth of multi-signature authority. For a royal decree to be valid, it might need the seals of the king, his chief scribe, and the commander of the guards. Each seal represented a different branch of authority, all consenting to the same action. This created checks and balances. It made fraud exponentially harder. To forge a document like this, you wouldn't need to steal one seal. You'd need to steal 3 or 4. And you'd have to replicate the exact placement, the specific order they were pressed into the soft clay. The system had grown from simple authentication to complex validation. So when we find a broken seal on a multi-seal document, the story deepens. That fracture isn't just the end of a promise. It's the end of a chorus. It's the silencing of several voices that once spoke in agreement. The breakage marks the moment a socially truth was either fulfilled or dissolved. It moves us from individual control into collective memory and social contract. This was information control maturing. It was no longer about one official guarding grain. It was about a society learning how to build trust together by making agreements visible, durable, and witnessed. But if a network of seals could verify a contract, what kind of network was needed to manage an entire empire? Where did all these witnessed, multi-sealed documents finally come to rest, to be referenced, to become the living law of the land, that web of witnesses? All those seals pressed into clay, it rested on craftsmanship. The power wasn't just the idea, it was the object, the stone, the carving, the substance itself. To see how they managed information, you have to see how they made these keys. It started with the material. These weren't simple stones, they were precious. Hematite, dark and metallic, taking a high polish. Lapis lazuli, a brilliant blue from distant mountains. Carnelian, a translucent red quartz. The material was a statement. It spoke of status, of resources. The seal was valuable before a single mark was carved. Then the artisan, a specialist with tools that seemed too delicate. A bow drill, a small copper or bronze bit set into a wooden spindle. A cord wrapped around it, pulled back and forth to spin the bit at high speed. This wasn't for holes. This was for carving, using that spinning tip with fine abrasives like powdered quartz to slowly incise lines into the hard stone. They were engraving in reverse. Every figure, every symbol, every line of a god's garment had to be carved in mirror image, so it would read right when rolled onto clay. It demanded an extraordinary spatial mind, a steady hand. Months of work could go into one cylinder. That expense, that skill, created a built-in security feature. Seal ownership was limited by default to a very small class, the elite, the administrators, merchants, priests who controlled resources and information. You couldn't just decide to have one. You needed the wealth to commission it and the position to justify its use. This material barrier made the system resilient. Forgery wasn't just deception. It was a monumental technical challenge. To create a convincing fake, you'd need the same rare stones. You need to find or be an artisan with that rare skill, capable of replicating a unique miniature work of art in mirror image. And you'd have to do it without the original seal, working only from a clay impression, itself a reversed image. The barrier to entry was so high it made the system trustworthy. The difficulty of creation was the guarantee of authenticity. Even the clay for the impressions was part of the design. Scribes used specific, fine-grained clay, prepared to be smooth and hold the tiniest detail. When rolled, the seal would sink into this receptive surface, capturing every nuance. Once dried or baked, that impression became a permanent, tamper-evident record. The right clay meant the signature was clear. The wrong clay, too gritty or soft, would blur the image, raising suspicion. So the whole, from mining the stone, to the artisan's slow dance with the bow drill, to preparing the clay tablet, was a chain of deliberate choices. Each step added a layer of security. Each material decision made the system harder to corrupt. Control over information began with control over matter. This wasn't abstract policy. It was physics and chemistry and artistry harnessed to solve a human problem. How do you make a promise solid? How do you make a fact stick? Their answer was to turn truth into a physical object, one so difficult to make that its very existence was proof. This elegant material system had a glaring weakness. What happened when the seal, this perfect object, met the messy reality of human conflict, or simple human-era archaeologists in the 70s in Syria? They found a burned room. And the fire, it didn't destroy the records, it baked them, preserved them. Thousands of clay tablets, an entire royal archive from Ebla just frozen there. And on those tablets the seals were broken. And those broken seals weren't just broken. They were a map, a physical map of an information system. When they studied it, they saw a pattern. The seals weren't random. Different departments had different styles. The grain controller had one seal, the textile overseer had another. The royal scribes was more elaborate, so it wasn't just a signature, it was branding. You could look at a sealed tablet and know which part of the bureaucracy made it, which authority it came from. The seal was a filing code baked right into the clay. The real story is in how they were broken. The breakage tells us how the archive worked. It was a living system. Tablets weren't just stored, they were retrieved. A scribe would need to check an old land grant or a treaty from 20 years before. They'd go to the archive, find the tablet still sealed in its clay envelope and break it open to read it. After consulting it, they'd often make a new tablet and update and seal that one for filing. The broken pieces, the fragments, they weren't thrown away. They were kept with the tablet, and that was crucial. That broken clay was a log entry, an audit trail. It showed the document had been accessed. It showed when its confidential shell was broken for official business. The state of the seal, intact or broken, and how it was broken became metadata. It told you the document's history. So you had a tiered system built from clay. A fully sealed tablet was top-level, confidential. Only someone with authority to break that seal could access it. A tablet with a broken seal but the fragments saved was an open file. Its contents were in active reference. A tablet with no seal at all was likely a draft or a public decree, information in the open domain. Ebla's archive shows a society that had moved beyond simple record-keeping. It had a physical protocol for data management. Hierarchical, secure, the broken seals were the system's memory. They recorded the of information, from sealed truth through consultation to referenced law. In that burned room, it's not just old documents. It's the ancient equivalent of server logs, user permissions, audit trails, all in sun-baked clay. A world thinking deeply about how to control, retrieve, verify its vital information. But a system like that, dependent on physical objects and one central archive, it faced a threat. What happens when the archive itself is attacked? When the fire isn't an accident but an act of war aimed at the civilization's memory, the seals weren't for silence. They were for verification. That's the real difference between controlling information and suppressing it. These ancient clerks, they weren't hiding records of grain or land sales. They were doing the opposite, making them permanent. Making them visible, attaching them to a name. The whole point was to broadcast trust, not to conceal the truth. When a merchant pressed his seal into a contract, he wasn't keeping that deal secret. He was announcing it, in the most durable way they knew. He was saying, "This happened, I was there, and this mark proves it." The control was over authenticity, not over the information itself. It was about creating a certified channel. So when information moved from the fields to the granary, from the king to an official, everyone in that chain could trust it hadn't been changed. That's constructive control. It's the difference between building a reliable aqueduct to direct water and just trying to hold back a river. One manages a vital resource to let things grow. The other is a fight against a natural force. The seal systems were the aqueduct. They channeled the lifeblood of commerce and law through these pathways. That's what let the city, and then the empire, function. You could trade with distant partners because a sealed tablet was a promise they could believe. You could run a tax system because the records in the archive were seen as incontrovertible. The control enabled complexity. It enabled scale. Without this framework of information, every deal would need personal trust between people who might never meet. The system replaced that fragile, personal trust with something institutional. Something verifiable. The seal was the tool that made that possible. So when we look at a broken seal now, we're not looking at an instrument of secrecy. We're looking at the fossil of a promise meant to be seen, meant to be recognized, relied upon by a whole network of people. It was a public good carved in stone. That changes how we see these early states. They weren't just powerful because they had armies. They were powerful because they had a system for making facts stick. And that system was built on sharing, the deliberate, careful sharing of certified information. But this brilliant system, this enabling system, it had a shadow side. What happens when the tool for verification becomes a tool for exclusion? When the seal that grants access to the system is used not to include, but to gatekeep? To decide very carefully who gets to speak with authority, the seal's authority was strongest in the marketplace. In the Bronze Age, you had these trade networks, a merchant from one city dealing with a trader from another, and they faced this basic problem. They were strangers, no shared history, no personal bond to back up a promise. So trust had to be manufactured, it had to be made tangible, and the cylinder seal was that solution. When two merchants closed a deal for copper for textile, they didn't just shake hands, they pressed their seals into a clay tablet that outlined the terms. That act turned a verbal agreement into a binding legal object. The merchant's unique identity, carved in stone, was now physically fused to the contract. It bound him to its terms. His reputation, his entire commercial standing, was pledged against that clay. This system let commerce stretch over distance. A merchant could seal a cargo, send it with a caravan. The recipient on delivery would inspect the seal. If it was intact, he knew the shipment hadn't been tampered with. Then he would break the seal himself, accepting the goods. That broken seal wasn't damage. It was a receipt, proof of fulfillment. It meant the contract was complete, the promise kept. The physical breakage closed the loop. It gave a clear, undeniable endpoint to the transaction. Something both parties could recognize. No ambiguity. The seal was either whole, meaning the cargo was en route under the original terms, or it was broken, meaning the goods had been officially received. That simple, binary state, intact or broken, created a framework for long-distance trade. The legal codes of the time formalized this power. Laws stated that a sealed document was incontrovertible evidence in a dispute. In court, before elders or an official, you didn't need a witness to remember the deal. You presented the clay tablet. The seals pressed into it were the witnesses. Their silent testimony was considered stronger than human memory, which could fade or be swayed. Controlling information, ensuring its authenticity, preserving it unchanged, that underpinned economic expansion. It turned risky personal ventures into a system. It gave the stability needed for markets to grow, for capital to be invested, for goods to flow across continents. The rule of law in its earliest form was literally set in stone. By verifying the facts of commerce, the seal didn't just enable trade. It built a foundation for a predictable, rules-based society where agreements had weight. But this legal power, concentrated in a small stone object, created a tension. What happened when the seal's promise of absolute truth met the messy reality of human dispute? When the system's perfect record confronted a story, it wasn't designed to hear. The seal's power wasn't just for the granary or the courtroom. It went into the temple, into the sacred space. And there, sealing something and breaking it, that carried a different weight, a deeper kind of meaning. Priests used cylinder seals too, but the carvings were different. You wouldn't see merchants or kings, you'd see gods, goddesses, ritual scenes, sacred animals. They rolled these seals onto temple inventories, lists of offerings, fine oils, precious metals, ceremonial clothes. When a priest sealed a jar of sacred oil, he wasn't just locking it up, he was dedicating it. The seal marked that shift. It turned ordinary oil into an offering, something set apart for the divine. It became a physical covenant, a bond between the community and the powers and that shows a connection. The same system that a copper shipment also authenticated a gift to a god. The logic of the marketplace, clear ownership, transfer, that logic was applied to a spiritual economy. The temple was the city's largest administrative center. It managed vast estates, herds, storerooms. The need for order, for accurate records, was just as critical there, maybe more critical. Because if the god's property was mismanaged, the consequences were cosmic: famine, drought, defeat. So the seal brought that same rigorous accountability to the divine ledgers, the same as it did for the royal ones. The most telling moment was during festivals, a harvest festival maybe. The temple doors would open, the community would gather, and priests would bring out sealed jars of grain or wine from the past season's offerings. To distribute that sacred bounty to the people, they had to break the seals. That snap of clay, that sound was loaded. It was a practical necessity, but it was also a ritual release. Breaking the seal transformed stored wealth into a communal blessing. It was the moment the gods' provision flowed back to the people. A closed system of divine accounting was opened. A cycle of gift and gratitude completed. This fusion shows something vital. For these societies, there was no clean separation. Not between the administrative and the sacred, not between controlling information and engaging with the divine. They were two sides of the same clay tablet. Order in the temple storeroom reflected cosmic order. A correctly authenticated inventory pleased the gods as much as the king's treasurer. The rules of verification, the need for a unique mark, an unbroken chain of custody, these weren't just bureaucratic tools. They were principles of a well-ordered universe, made small enough to hold in your hand. The seal became a point where human systems of control touched systems of belief. It was the hinge between the ledger and the liturgy. Using the same technology for both declared something. It declared that trust, authenticity, faithful record-keeping, these weren't just practical concerns. They were sacred duties. The integrity of the seal upheld the integrity of the covenant between heaven and earth. That deep intertwining gave the system its cultural power. It wasn't just law. It was a kind of ritual, a repeated formal act that reinforced the very structure of reality. Their reality. But if the seal's authority was woven into the fabric of belief, what happened when that fabric was torn? When the symbols on the seal, meant to represent eternal order, outlived the civilization that created them, a perfect verification system. It always creates its own shadow. What gave cylinder seals their power, that uniqueness, their material value, also made them a target. If a seal was your entire legal and economic identity, then controlling it or making a convincing copy, that was the ultimate hack. An ancient form of identity theft. And forgery did happen, we know from Mesopotamian texts. The laws of Hammurabi are clear. The penalty for falsifying a sealed document wasn't a fine. It could mean losing a hand, which tells us something. The people who built these systems, they weren't naive. They knew the threat of misinformation was built right in. They anticipated fraud. They encoded deterrence into the law itself. And we might have evidence of these failures. Archaeology. Sometimes you find a broken seal with a tablet, but the text inside doesn't match the official named on the seal. Maybe a merchant's seal authorized a shipment he never saw, or a scribe's seal was on a decree he didn't write. In those cases, the broken clay isn't proof of a promise kept. It's potential evidence of a promise broken, a silent witness to an ancient con. The forger's methods were limited by technology but clever. They could steal a seal outright. Or more skillfully, they could study a clay impression and try to carve a new cylinder that replicated the mirror image. Incredibly difficult given the materials and artistry, but not impossible. A skilled artisan with a grudge or paid enough could become a weapon against the system. So you see this arms race. As seal designs got more complex to prevent copying, forgers adapted. Authorities responded with central registries of sealed designs, like a database of authorized signatures. They relied on witnesses who knew the seal's owner personally. The system was in constant adjustment, patching flaws as they were found. This struggle, it's not a footnote, it's central. It shows the battle over information, over what we can trust. That's not a modern invention. It's a foundational human conflict. The broken seal in these instances marks a breach, a moment where the architecture of trust was tested and sometimes compromised. Yet these failures are instructive. They prove the system had value worth attacking. No one forges a worthless document. The existence of forgery underscores how much real power flowed through those channels of authenticated clay. It confirms the seal's authority wasn't just symbolic. It had tangible material consequences. And the constant effort to combat fraud shows a society committed, however imperfectly, to upholding the integrity of its own records. They were investing energy in defending the truth as they understood it. This ancient tension between creating a tool for trust and the inevitable attempts to exploit it, it frames a question, one that echoes beyond burnt archives. If the physical seal could be faked, what happens when the entire system of verification itself comes under a different kind of attack? Not from a lone forger with a stolen stone, but from a force that challenges the very symbols of authority carved into the seal. The need to verify, to control information through a physical object that wasn't something Mesopotamia invented. It was a human impulse. And you see it emerge independently in different forms as you move across the ancient world. The Indus Valley civilization far to the east had its own system. Their seals were different, small squares of steatite, a soft stone hardened by fire, and they weren't carved with gods or kings. They were carved with animals, unicorns, elephants, bulls. And above these animals, a line of symbols, a script, a writing system we still can't read. It's one of history's unopened envelopes. We don't know what the words say, but we know what the seals did. They've been found in ancient port cities far from where they were made, pressed into clay tags attached to bales of goods. A merchant sending cotton or precious stones would seal the shipment with his unique mark. That animal and that mysterious script were his brand, his signature. It told the receiver who sent it, maybe guaranteed the quality. It was a tool for long-distance trade in a world of strangers, solving the same problem Mesopotamian merchants faced. The design was different, but the function was identical. Create trust at a distance, certify ownership, control information about property. Then there's Egypt. The iconic form there was the scarab, a stone carved in the shape of a dung beetle with a flat base. On that base, hieroglyphs were carved in reverse. The scarab was rolled or pressed into clay and mud sealings. It served administrative functions, sealing jars in tombs, marking documents, but it carried a heavier symbolic load. To the Egyptians, the scarab represented transformation and rebirth. The beetle rolling its ball of dung was like the sun god rolling the sun across the sky. So when an official used his scarab seal, he wasn't just authorizing a tax record. He was imprinting that action with a cosmic metaphor, linking the mundane act of bureaucracy to the eternal cycles of nature and divinity. The seal was a hinge point again, where practical control met profound belief. Seeing these parallel paths is crucial. In Mesopotamia, the cylinder. In the Indus Valley, the square stamp with script. In Egypt, the scarab. The materials, the artistry, the symbols, they were products of their unique cultures. But the core idea was a universal breakthrough. When a society grows beyond a small village, when trade stretches beyond the horizon, when authority must be delegated, you hit a wall. The wall of human memory and personal trust. It's too fragile. It doesn't scale. And in at least 3 separate cradles of civilization, the answer was the same. Create a unique, durable, hard-to-forge object. Let that object stand in for a person. Let its impression on clay become a certified fact. This wasn't cultural diffusion. This was convergent evolution. A similar social pressure, the complexity of a new urban world, triggered a similar adaptation. The physical seal was that adaptation. It was the tool that allowed society to level up. To manage resources, people, and ideas across space and time. It was the operating system for early civilization itself. And if this system was so fundamental, so deeply embedded in the architecture of early states, then its end must tell us something equally profound. What happens when the seal, this anchor of reality, is no longer the primary tool? When a new technology arrives to take its place, that certified mark, that universal need, it wasn't alone. It grew up next to something else, writing. And the relationship between the seal and the script, it wasn't just convenient, it was foundational. They were born together, in the same rooms for the same urgent purpose. The earliest clay tablets from Mesopotamia, they aren't poems or histories. They're lists, they're numbers, accounts, simple pictographic signs for sheep, for jars of oil, tally marks for quantities. This was proto-cuneiform, a new technology for externalizing memory. But that memory, written in wet clay, was vulnerable. Anyone could make a mark, anyone could change a number. So from the very beginning, the record needed a lock, it needed the seal. A scribe would press his stylus into the clay to record, say, 10 goats received. Then right there on the same tablet, he would roll his personal cylinder seal. The seal impression authenticated the numbers. It answered the question writing alone couldn't answer. Who says this is true? The seal provided the answer. It attached an identity, an authority to the data. So writing began not as an art form but as a tool for control, and control required verification. There were 2 sides of the same clay slab. One was useless without the other. An unsealed tablet was just a claim. A seal without writing was just a pretty stone. But together they created something new, a certified fact. As writing evolved over centuries, becoming more abstract, capturing complex language, laws, letters, The seal evolved right alongside it. Its role didn't diminish. It became more specialized, more sophisticated. It moved from authenticating simple counts to guaranteeing treaties, marriage contracts, royal decrees. The written word carried the message. The seal carried the authority behind it. This was a symbiotic relationship, a partnership that built the administrative state. You couldn't have the vast bureaucracy of an empire running on scrolls or oral promises. You needed a system that was durable, portable, and above all, verifiable. Clay tablets and cylinder seals provided that. The tablet was the medium, the writing was the content, and the seal was the security protocol. It was the ancient equivalent of the padlock icon in your browser, right there next to the text. It told everyone this communication is secure, this source is authentic, you can base your decisions on this. Think of the implication. The very architecture of early civilization, its laws, its economy, its governance, was built on a twin pillar, the pillar of recording information and the pillar of securing it. One allowed complexity, the other allowed trust in that complexity. They invented data, and simultaneously they invented data integrity. This hand-in-hand development suggests something fundamental about how human systems grow. We don't first learn to speak and then, later, learn to tell the truth. The need to communicate and the need to make that communication reliable, they emerge together. They push each other forward. The seal pushed writing to be more official, and writing gave the seal a more important thing to protect. So when we look at a broken seal next to cuneiform script, we're not looking at two separate artifacts. We're looking at a single, complete system for managing reality. A system where the message and its guarantee were baked into the same physical object. But this perfect physical system had a ceiling. What happens when your civilization outgrows clay? When the volume of information becomes too vast to carry, and the need for verification must travel at the speed of thought? That stone cylinder with its unique carving was a private key. And the impression it left in the clay, that was a public signature. The logic is identical, even 4,000 years apart. A Mesopotamian scribe, rolling his seal to authenticate a grain receipt, was doing the same fundamental thing as a software engineer today, using a private key to sign an email. They're both answering the same question. How do you prove beyond doubt that a message came from a specific source and that it hasn't been altered? One system was analog, baked in clay. Ours is digital, encoded in bits. But the architecture of trust is the same. And that broken seal itself, that's a form of data. Its fractured state is metadata. When an official broke the clay envelope to read the tablet inside, that breakage was an event. It was recorded in the physical world. It left evidence. That's a log entry. It's an ancient, tangible version of a timestamp on a digital file. It tells you when the document was accessed. It creates an audit trail. Our entire digital world runs on these trails: server logs, blockchain confirmations, version histories. They're the invisible, automated descendants of that deliberate snap of clay. If you look around with this ancient lens, the echoes are everywhere. The holographic seal on a medicine bottle, designed to tear if it's tampered with, that's a direct heir to the clay bulla on a storage jar. A notary's embossed seal on a paper document, that's the spiritual successor to the witness seal pressed beside the primary parties. Even the concept of a non-fungible token, an NFT, resonates. An NFT uses a blockchain to certify a unique digital item, linking it to an owner. It's a claim of authenticity and provenance. That's precisely what a cylinder seal did. It was a non-fungible token for the physical world, certifying the unique authority of its owner and the provenance of the document. This isn't just a curious parallel, it's a continuity. Our current struggles with deepfakes, misinformation, digital identity theft, these aren't entirely new frontiers. They're the latest chapters in humanity's oldest technological story. The story of how we build tools to create trust and how others inevitably find ways to test that trust or break it. The materials change, the scale explodes, but the core problem remains familiar. How do we know what's real? How do we verify who is speaking? How do we make a promise stick across time and distance? Understanding that broken clay seal reframes our digital age. We're not facing a unique crisis of authenticity. We're participating in a long tradition, a tradition of invention and adaptation. The scribes of Ebla and the developers in Silicon Valley, they're working on different versions of the same project, building systems to help a society function by making certain truths verifiable. When you see that lineage, our modern challenges feel less like an unprecedented emergency. They feel more like the next step in a very old conversation. A conversation that began when someone first pressed a carved stone into wet clay and said, "This mark represents me." And this fact is now true, the broken seal in the excavation tray. It's a quiet puzzle. For the archaeologist, the fracture isn't the end, it's the first clue, a much smaller investigation. The immediate question is timing. Was this cylinder snapped in antiquity during its actual use? In a storeroom or an archive? Or did it break centuries later, under the pressure of earth shifting above it, or even during the careful work of the excavation itself? The answer changes everything. It determines whether this object is a direct participant in history or a later casualty of time. Location gives the first layer of context. Finding the fragment against a specific doorjamb, its clay still clinging to the stone, that suggests it was a door seal. Broken when that chamber was last entered, discovering it beside a particular tablet, especially one still bearing the ghost of a matching impression, that ties it directly to that documents. But the soil is a tricky narrator. Objects move over, floods, burrowing animals, later construction. They can displace even the most telling artifact, so the archaeologist has to look closer, much closer. This is where science enters the trench. Under a microscope, the edge of the break tells a story. If the clay surrounding the seal was still damp, still plastic when the cylinder fractured, the broken edges might be smooth, slightly deformed. The seal would have sunk into the yielding material as it broke. If the clay was already hard and dry, baked by sun or fire, the break would be sharp, clean, a clean snap. Residue analysis can search for microscopic traces of the original clay, or of the oils from the hand that last held it. This forensic approach transforms the find. It's no longer just cataloging an object, it's reconstructing an event, a single fleeting moment. The archaeologist becomes a detective of a silent crime scene. The crime is the breach of a system. Each broken seal represents a decision point, an authorized opening or a forced entry, a routine administrative act or a moment of crisis. By analyzing the break, the surrounding context, the materials, they can begin to answer that. They can distinguish between the gentle, deliberate snap of a scribe accessing a record for reference, and the violent shatter of a seal crushed under a falling roof beam as a city burned. One is part of the system's normal function. The other is the system's catastrophic failure. This painstaking work reconstructs more than an object. It reconstructs a procedure, a single step in a long-lost bureaucratic dance. It lets us witness, across the gulf of time, the precise instant when a sealed truth was either consummated or violated. It turns a fragment of stone into a window, onto a human action frozen in its physical consequences. And if we can reconstruct the moment a single seal broke, what might we learn from the patterns formed by thousands of such breaks, all found together? What grander narrative of control and collapse do they collectively write? That broken seal in the clay from a provincial official was more than a signature. It was a map of a specific kind of power, the authority to make something official to verify a fact that wasn't for everyone. It was a privilege, carved in expensive stone and granted from the top down. The best seals, lapis or carnelian, they took wealth to get and skill to carve. That wasn't an accident, it was by design. By making the tool of authentication a luxury, the system limited its use. To a class of people, the administrative elite, the connected merchants, the temple priests, control over information started with control over how you certified it, and those means were rationed. It created a visible chain, a ladder of trust that mirrored the social ladder. At the very top was the king. His seal often had the symbols of the gods. His authority was the source. He delegated that downward, to his chief stewards, to regional governors, to temple overseers. Each level down got a seal, a physical token of their place. When a governor sealed a tax record, he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was channeling the king's authority. His seal was a branch from the royal trunk, and that branch could delegate further to local scribes, to collectors, creating smaller twigs of power. So when a farmer in a distant village brought his grain to the storehouse, the transaction ended with a seal. That small impression in the clay was the endpoint of a long chain. The king's will made manifest in a single act. The farmer might never see the king, might never go to the capital. But in that moment, as the scribe rolled his cylinder, the farmer was touching the operational reality of the state. The abstract idea of royal power became something he could see, something that governed the fruits of his labor. The seal made the hierarchy tangible. It turned a social structure into a daily procedure. This fusion had an effect. Information control, verifying grain where it was from, who owed what, that was the bloodstream of the state. And social control, maintaining order, enforcing loyalty, collecting resources, that was the body. They needed each other. You couldn't have one without the other. The seal system bound them together. Every time a sealed document was made or broken, it wasn't just managing data. It was performing the hierarchy, rehearsing the relationships of power. The scribe with the seal had authority over the farmer without one. The governor's seal outranked the local scribe. The king's seal outranked them all. This was how the early state cemented itself, not just with walls and soldiers, but with a million small acts of bureaucratic authentication. Each sealed tablet was a brick in an invisible fortress, a fortress built not of stone, but of certified agreements, obligations. The system created stability, a framework for a complex society to function, but it also froze a certain order in place. It made the social ladder look like a natural fact, as solid as the stone of the seal itself. The power to say what was true, to make a record official, became inseparable from your position in that frozen order. And that raises a quiet question about the tools we build for trust. Do they just reflect the world as it is, or do they shape it, hardening certain structures by baking them into the very protocols we rely on? The seal's power wasn't confined to storage rooms or market stalls. It moved into stories, into myth. Mesopotamian legends are full of objects that carry authority. In the epic Gilgamesh, he doesn't just use his strength. He has tools, seals. They grant him passage. They command obedience. There's a version where he uses a seal to secure a message to the sun god. The act of sealing a plea, making it official and binding, it's woven right into the cosmic story. These stories tell us people didn't see the cylinder seal as just some administrative tool. They saw it as a powerful technology. A technology so potent it could work in the world of gods and monsters. In myth, the seal becomes a magical key, a token that could open a mountain pass sealed by a god, or authenticate a decree that even the underworld would honor. And that's crucial. It means the seal's function was understood at a deep cultural level, that a unique mark could make something irrevocably true, that it could control access, verify identity. This wasn't just a practical fix. It was a principle strong enough to shape their imagination. It became a plot device in their oldest tales. This mythologizing did something for the real system. It normalized it. It embedded the logic of the seal into the shared mind. When a farmer watched a temple official roll his cylinder onto clay, that action resonated with the legends he knew. It connected everyday bureaucracy to the foundational stories of his culture. The official wasn't just a clerk. He was performing a small, earthly version of a cosmic ritual, wielding a sliver of the same authority that heroes and gods wielded in the epics. That cultural embedding made the information control system feel inevitable, natural. It wasn't an arbitrary rule from above. It was an extension of how the universe itself was thought to work. Order was maintained through binding agreements, through marks of authenticity. Chaos was what happened when those seals were broken without right. This link between the physical tool and the mythological ideal gave the system a deep resilience. To challenge, a sealed document wasn't just challenging a man. You were subtly challenging a story that explained how reality was supposed to function. The legacy of this mythic connection is long. Think of the signet ring in European folklore, a ring that proves a king's identity, or the magical seal in Near Eastern tales that commands genies or locks away evil. These are direct descendants of that ancient Mesopotamian idea, the object that contains and projects authority, that makes a promise unbreakable. The physical seal, by being written into legend, transcended its clay and stone. It became a symbol for the human desire to make things certain in an uncertain world, to stamp our identity onto the chaos of events and say, this happened, I was here, this is true. But if the seal's power could be celebrated in myth, it could also be feared. What happens when that symbol of absolute authority falls into the wrong hands, not in a story, but in the fragile reality of a collapsing empire? That sound of clay breaking, it wasn't a private thing. It was meant to be heard. For the important seals, like on the granary doors or on the clay cases for treaties, breaking them was a performance, a ritual. Think of the harvest. The community is waiting. The steward walks up to the big granary doors. The king's seal is there, pressed into the clay over the lock, and in front of everyone the steward takes a staff maybe and breaks it. That snap, that's the signal. It means distribution can start. It turns stored grain into food that moves. The breaking isn't damage, it's a release. A public change from a promise to something real. Same idea with treaties. Ambassadors come to make an agreement official. The clay tablet is inside its sealed envelope. Both kings' seals are on the outside, and in front of all the officials, a priest or a scribe breaks that outer shell. That act makes the treaty start. It moves the terms from a private deal to a public law. The broken pieces weren't thrown out. They were kept sometimes as a record. The breaking was the climax, the moment something potential became actual. This ritual added a layer to how information was controlled. It took the system out of the archive and into the public square. It made a bureaucratic check into a social event. Breaking the seal became something scheduled. It announced that a flow was beginning, the flow of grain or the flow of peace. By making it public, the state did something smart. It used the ceremony to strengthen the system's legitimacy. People didn't just get grain, they saw it being released by the king's own seal. They saw the chain of custody. That built trust, or the look of it. The ritual turned the seal from a lock into a symbol. It marked a boundary between a secured reserve and an active resource, between a secret deal and a public agreement. The broken seal wasn't an ending. It was a catalyst. Its destruction was the cost of starting something. And by making that a ceremony, early states wove their control into daily life. That snap of clay became as important as a spoken oath. A physical vow everyone saw being made and unmade together. Shows an understanding. For information or what it represents to have real power, its release has to be as meaningful as its protection. The ceremony made sure the moment of access was never casual. It was always a deliberate witness step in the state's story. And if the state could ritualize breaking a seal, then what other moments were staged like this? Not just to manage goods, but to manage how people saw power itself. That lapis lazuli cylinder, found broken in a storeroom. It's a mile marker, a point on a map that stretches for thousands of miles. Lapis comes from one place, the mountains in Afghanistan. For that blue stone to end up as a seal in a Sumerian official's hand, it had to travel, over mountains, across deserts, on donkeys, in boats, through the hands of so many traders. That journey is a story of connection. And the seal itself, carved with local gods, is the last page of that story. It tells us that by the time an administrator used it to stamp a grain shipment, his city was part of a vast network, intercontinental. It moved goods and it moved ideas. The stone in his hand was proof of a world much larger than his city. That principle turns every seal into a data point. The material is the first clue. A carnelian seal might trace back to the Indus Valley, hematite to Anatolia. When archaeologists find these foreign stones in unexpected places, they're finding a root, a link in a chain of trust, a chain strong enough to move valuable objects, these identity-laden objects, across dangerous distances. A foreign material seal suggests more than trade. It suggests established contact. Regular enough that such an exchange was normal. Reliable enough that a merchant felt secure carrying his most precious token, his legal self, into a far-off land. The carvings offer another layer. Sometimes a seal found in one region bears the artistic style of another. A Mesopotamian-style seal turns up in Anatolia. An Egyptian scarab design appears in the Levant. This isn't just an imported object, it's cultural language. It could be a diplomatic gift for an ambassador to use abroad, or a local artisan imitating a powerful foreign style for a client, someone who wants to signal those connections. In either case, the imagery becomes a form of communication. It says, I understand your symbols. I operate within your framework of power. The seal facilitates contact by speaking a visual dialect that all parties recognize. Now picture a broken seal fragment in the soil of a foreign port city. Not a whole cylinder, just a piece. That fracture takes on new meaning. It could be the sad end of a merchant's career, his identity shattered far from home, but more likely it's evidence of routine business. A Mesopotamian merchant arrives at a Levantan port. He uses his seal to authorize a deal, to close a contract on a clay tablet. Maybe the seal is damaged in the process, or the tablet is later broken. That fragment left behind is a ghost of a transaction. It marks the physical presence of a person from a distant culture conducting business in a foreign land. He didn't need a shared language. He needed a system they both understood. A system where a rolled impression on clay meant the same thing everywhere. The seal was his passport and his notary all in one. By studying these broken nodes, fragments of foreign stone, of hybrid artistry, we can map an ancient form of globalization. It wasn't a global market in our sense, but it was a web of interconnected local systems that all used the same basic technology of trust. The cylinder seal and its cousins were the protocol. They allowed these different networks to handshake, to exchange information about ownership, debt, agreement. This system of information control didn't just facilitate trade, it grew from it. As trade routes expanded, the need for a reliable, long-distance method of authentication became urgent. The seal was the solution, portable, durable, unique. It allowed complexity and trust to scale alongside the growing connections between cultures. So when we look at that small, broken piece of lapis lazuli, we're seeing a snapshot of an interconnected Bronze Age world. A world where the control of information wasn't a barrier, but a bridge built from stone, clay, and a shared human need to make a promise stick, even with someone you'll never see again. This system of identity made the wider world possible, but it also created a new vulnerability. If your entire economic life was tied to a physical object you carried into foreign lands, what happened when the political winds shifted? When the network itself began to fray, a seal tells you something, but the absence of a seal that tells you something else. You find these tablets everywhere, just the writing, no seal, the clay is bare. That silence means something. It means not everything needed that kind of authority. A family deal, a note between scribes who saw each other every day. A count of baskets or everyday pots. In those cases, the trust was already there. The relationship was the security. The whole sealing process, it took time, it cost something. So there was a line, a threshold. Below a certain value or a certain risk, they didn't use it. They made a choice. Every time, it was a kind of calculation. Making a cylinder seal took months. It was expensive stone, skilled work. Using it was a deliberate act, so they saved it for the big things. Shipments of grain or silver, legal contracts for land, royal commands that had to be unquestioned. The seal went where the risk was highest, where a lie would cost too much. Where you don't see a seal, you can see the trusted circle. A scribe in the temple writing to a scribe in the palace workshop. They might not seal it, they knew each other. They were part of the same system. The handwriting was enough, or the expectation of a quick reply that created its own check. In those spaces, the control wasn't in the stone. It was in the routine, the proximity, that pragmatism. It's a lesson for any system. You can't secure everything perfectly, and you shouldn't try. The goal is to match the protection to what's being protected. You don't need a vault for a sandwich. They understood that. Their system had layers. At the top, the cylinder seal for the most important truths. In the middle, maybe a simpler mark, and for the small daily things, no seal at all. Just the understanding between people, so looking at where the seals are missing, that completes it. It shows a society that was sophisticated, not just rigid. They built this powerful tool for control, but they also knew when not to use it. When to rely on the older networks, the human trust. That balance, it's a dance we still do. A quick text or a formal contract. We're walking the same line, deciding based on risk and relationship how much proof we need, how to make a truth hold. Sometimes the most efficient system knows when to leave the seal in its pouch. When to let an unsealed word be enough. We still talk about sealing a deal or a seal of approval, signed, sealed, and delivered. These aren't just phrases, they're fossils. They come from a time when a promise wasn't real until you pressed it into clay. That act of rolling a cylinder seal created a category for finality, for authenticity, for when an intention becomes fixed. When we say something is sealed, we mean it's closed, settled, protected. That meaning was baked into the first records. A broken seal from 4,000 years ago is the ancestor of these words. It's the physical root of an abstract idea we still use, for trust. You see this legacy most clearly in law. A sealed verdict, a sealed court record. The term carries that ancient weight. To seal a document now isn't about wax, it's about solemnity, restricted access. It marks information as authenticated by the institution's authority. It places it under a controlled protocol. The word itself becomes the lock. It signals this truth is certified. Its integrity must be preserved. This legal language is a direct thread back to the temple storeroom. The royal archive. It keeps the original idea that some truths are so important their container, clay or digital, must be formally secured. Its opening must be a deliberate act. Even a signature works as a seal. Your name on a contract is your unique mark, your claim. It's simpler technology but the same purpose. It answers the old question. Who says this is true? I do. Here is my mark. The ritual of signing formalizes commitment more than words. It makes the promise tangible. It creates an artifact for the future. That's the same function the cylinder seal performed. It turned a fleeting intention into a durable fact, a fact that could be witnessed, stored, presented later as proof. This imprint on language shows something about how societies build trust. We don't invent from nothing. We build new layers on old foundations. The physical practice of sealing gave us a model, with its clear binaries, intact and broken, secure and accessed. It was a model for managing commitment itself. It taught us that for a complex promise to hold, it needs an external marker, a marker that transforms private agreement into public fact. That model was so effective, so embedded, that when the clay tablets crumbled, the concept didn't die. It shed its skin of stone, found new forms, in wax seals, in signed affidavits, in digital certificates. So when you hear someone say they sealed the deal, you're hearing an echo of a scribe rolling his cylinder, binding his identity to an agreement. That phrase connects you across 40 centuries, to the moment humanity figured out how to make a promise solid, how to take the uncertainty of the future and press a little certainty into it, one small mark at a time. The broken seals in the ground are quiet, but the words they left us are still speaking, still shaping how we think about truth, about commitment, about the fragile architecture of trust we build every day, a piece of carved stone. It looks small compared to everything digital. But that broken cylinder and the system it was part of, it's not just a relic, it's a foundation. We're still building on it. This path from clay to code, it shows something about how we think. Our ancestors weren't just stacking bricks or raising armies. They were building a different kind of thing. They were making systems. Systems to manage what kept their new, complex societies alive, reliable information. They were dealing with the problem of trust over a distance. They made tools for identity in a world of strangers. They designed rules for security. They worked out how to delegate authority. These aren't old problems. They're the same problems we have now in a networked world. When you log in with a password, you're using a private key. It's a successor to that unique cylinder. When you see a hologram on a medicine bottle, meant to tear if it's opened, you're looking at the descendant of a clay seal on a storage jar. The principles are the same. The materials changed. So next time you send a signed document or use an encrypted message, just for a moment, think about the old logic in that action. Think about the scribe rolling his seal, tying his identity to a promise in clay. That click of verification from 4,000 years ago, it still echoes in every secure transaction we make now.